Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for the warm welcome we've received in Geneva. I want to focus my comments on three core issues: justice, legitimacy, and national ownership. And the reason is simple. I believe we need to talk about these fundamental principles of talking peace far more than is currently the case. I was born in Rhodesia, a country at war with itself. I grew up in that racially divided country, trying to understand why we were at war with our black fellow countrymen and women. Our blacks are the happiest blacks in Africa. Prime Minister Ian Smith repeatedly told us. They have no grievances. They're being misled by communists. He also told us that the British pop group, the Beatles, were communists. None of this rang true. All around me, I saw the grievances created by our racist society. At the age of 17, I was called up for compulsory military service in the Rhodesian army. I knew from personal experience that the white minority were never going to voluntarily concede. The black majority had no alternative but to fight. So where was I going to stand in this fight? Should I refuse to join the army and go to jail? Should I simply run away? I decided to join the black guerrilla forces in the forests. And so I became a terrorist. That's what we were called. In fact, we were called Charlie Tangos, communist terrorists. And not only by the racist Rhodesian politicians and media, Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher, and many other Western leaders and much of the Western press called us terrorists. Joshua Nkomo, Nelson Mandela, and little old 17-year-old me, we were all terrorists. And apparently we had no real grievances. We could never be brought to the negotiating table. We simply had to be defeated. But eventually we did come to the negotiating table, and everyone, including our enemies, knew that it was our efforts and sacrifices on the battlefield that had made negotiation, liberation, and peace possible. I learned a very important lesson from this experience. I learned that behind conflict there are always root causes, whatever the propaganda might claim. I learned that we cannot ignore injustice, perceived or real, if we want to seriously talk about peace. So that's my first fundamental principle. Peacemaking must concern itself with justice. There can be no sustainable peace without justice. Apparently, I've since moved on from being a terrorist. I'm now called an expert advisor. In fact, I don't see any change between what I did during the Liberation War and what I do now. I'm still fighting for justice and peace, just as I once did in the forests. Over the past 30 years since I left the guerrilla army, I've been involved in a great many peace processes in Africa. I've worked for the United Nations, the African Union, the European Union, African governments and rebel movements, usually as an advisor on military and security aspects of peace processes. I've crossed many front lines during this time, always making an effort to understand all sides of the conflict, and most especially trying to listen to the voices of the actual people in the conflict and affected by the conflict. In my experience, sustainable peace building is essentially about confidence building. Adversaries need to find each other and rebuild their trust in each other. If the international community is to play an effective role in this process, it also has to demonstrate that it's a trusted partner. It's for this reason that the international community must protect and remain firmly committed to the core principles which frame international law. That is the only basis on which the international community can maintain its legitimacy as a peacemaker. A great deal has changed in the 30 years I've been working on peace. For a start, there are a great many more of us than there once were. Peace processes have become more institutionalized. The system dominates peace processes in a way it never did. And peace building has become a big and very profitable business. Accompanying these developments, there have been gains. There's certainly more professionalism and efficiency, but there have clearly been losses too. Among them, the commitment to the core principles of justice and legitimacy. Working in Somalia, I objected to the cover-up of human rights violations and the failure by the international community to ensure implementation of its own commitments to human rights in police and justice support programs. I was told I was being unrealistic, romantic, and naive. My response was to ask the obvious question: how can we expect to be seen as legitimate promoters of peace when we allow impunity and practice double standards? Where is the legitimacy in our multilateral efforts for peace today? What has happened to the normative frameworks that previous generations struggled so hard to build? Frameworks that were expected to prevent us from committing war crimes in broad daylight. They are slipping away, in my view, and without legitimacy, the international community can only project power, not justice. Finally, I want to say something briefly about national ownership. Today, I work on an inclusive, nationally owned and driven, consensus-based peace and security program in my own country, Zimbabwe. All the national parties and stakeholders are represented in the program, including what some of our resident diplomats call spoilers and hardliners, along with what they choose to call change agents. But we are working with all these stakeholders, trying to build our own national consensus. Despite our demonstrable progress and results, many Western development cooperation agencies working on peace and governance in Zimbabwe don't work with us. They are busy with their own externally devised strategies. What they are looking for are obedient contractors, not national partners with strategies of their own. This example from Zimbabwe is increasingly reflected globally. The large international peace-building machine, including the multilateral agencies and the donors, are in danger of losing touch with the local people-based perspectives and peace processes, and along with that, justice and legitimacy. Those of us working in such processes are increasingly alone on the ground. So that's my closing appeal, speaking to you as a war veteran. Don't neglect the role of nationally based people-to-people peace processes. A final word, I had in mind that this gathering might be a little bit like the Cannes Film Festival, where script writers, like myself, might be able to pitch their scripts to producers. So if there are any producers in the audience looking for a really good script, I'd be delighted to meet you to discuss our program in Zimbabwe. Thank you.